I told Mom at the beginning of this lesson was kind of hard because I don't really like reading these chapters. Put it bluntly.
Where are we?
We are in 2 Samuel chapter 13 and 14. All right. So we are finding out now the consequences of David's sin, the reaping.
Is that thing on?
I don't know. I think so. I'm going to guess. I think I see it. So David was forgiven by God. Why would there still be consequences?
You reap what you sow.
We do. We reap what we sow. And, sometimes, though, I've known instances where God has either altered it, make the reaping less, He's merciful. And the thing is, He was with David every minute of all this reaping. God was right there with him. But David did reap. And had David been able, at the point that he looked the first time at Bathsheba, if God would have shown him a little movie of what the rest of his life would be like, I think David would have fallen on his face and said, "Oh, save me from this." And if that could just be our attitude now, because the reaping is so, I've seen it personally. The reaping of sin is horrific sometimes.
And it has to be us. It can't start with young boys because they would never believe any of that. Young boys are going to do what they want to do.
Well, unless God's part of their life.
I
All
don't
right.
know.
Let's start with 2 Samuel 13:1. And it came to pass after all these events of David's, that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Now remember, David had a harem, and we probably don't even know the names of all the wives that he had, or the concubines, and to me, that's just right there a recipe for lots of trouble. But he had a lot of children. And 2 Samuel 3:2 and 3, it says, "Unto David were sons born in Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam the Jezreelitess," and we don't know much about her. "And the third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur." There was a second son in there, and he was the son of Abigail, but we never hear anything about him, so I don't know what the deal was with him. But notice this chapter, we will see as we go on, is about Amnon lusting after Tamar, but it begins saying it came to pass that Absalom, the son of David, had a sister. He says it in this way because I think we're going to see the story is actually about Absalom. But Absalom, we're going to see his reactions, and I think God put it this way because Absalom ended up trying to take the kingdom from David, and he lost his life. So he is the one that we're going to be looking at for a while, and it's his sister. His full sister, Tamar, was the daughter of same parents as Absalom, David and the, what was her name? Maacah. I don't know how you say that. Maacah. All right. Now, verse 2.
In chapter 13?
And Amnon, I'm reading, excuse me, in the English Standard Version right now. Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. What does this sound like to you? True love? Lust, yes.
That's why I said that about the boys, young boys. Had one.
Um, Leanne, would you read verses 3 through 5, please?
But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, and Jonadab was a very subtle man. And he said unto him, Why art thou, being the king's son, lean from day to day? Wilt thou not tell me? And Amnon said unto him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. And Jonadab said unto him, Lay thee down on thy bed, and pretend thou art sick. When thy father cometh to see thee, say unto him, I pray thee, let my sister Tamar come, and give me food, and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it, and eat it at her hand.
All right. So this Jonadab was Amnon's cousin. And I think Satan used this man, and Satan had this idea. And, you know, Satan can do that pretty easily.
He knew everything what to
Yeah.
do.
So, where in the New Testament, what does it say about Satan as far as his designs toward us? He came to what?
Kill, steal, and destroy.
Yes. And we see him working here. Now, had Amnon, number one, he's the son of David. David was a man after God's own heart. And you think, well, why wasn't some of this passed down to his kids? But we see Amnon right away. It's lust, that's all it is. And he could have stopped it right here, either by asking for Tamar in marriage or realizing it was lust. You know, we as human beings real often think that, well, it's not going to hurt that big. It's not that big a deal. I know it's not quite what God might want, but you know, God's rules for us are always to our benefit. He doesn't ever sit up there and say, well, it's going to be fun. Let's see if they can do this, this, and this, and this, make them jump through all these hoops. We don't serve a God like that.
Because there's going to be something after that.
Right.
It's going to lead to.
Yes. The sin always comes with strings attached. And when it has full course, it brings death. Every time, death. And so, you know, I just feel so sorry that Amnon was just led down this path, and he just willingly went. So, what could have Amnon done? What do you think he could have done at this point when he was really wanting Tamar?
Oh, stick his head in the sand.
Well, it said he could have asked for her hand in marriage.
Right. So we know he wasn't thinking marriage. I don't know why.
Yeah, because it says he loved her. Well, that scratches that right off the top.
Right. All right. So Amnon decides, oh, this is a very good idea. And what is amazing to me in the next few verses is that nobody saw through this, especially David. He should have been smarter than this. Verse 6, so Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, just a side note, I was glad that the king came to see him. But Amnon said to the king, please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat from her hand. David must have had his mind on something else, because it seems pretty clear. Why would he do this? You know, why would he need this? I don't know what David was thinking. But as the dad and the king, he should have said,
Beat it.
yeah, what's going on with you? So we see verse 7, David sent home to Tamar saying, go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, where he was lying down, and she took dough and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight and baked the cakes. So she was there for a while. And, you know, she was a virgin. All of the virgins' daughters had a special robe that they would wear. And I'm guessing that she was probably pretty young, and she didn't realize the trap that was set for her. Verse 9, and she took a pan and poured them out before him. but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, have out all men from me. And they went out, every man from him. And Amnon said to Tamar, bring the meat into the chamber, that I may eat of thine hand. And Tamar took the cakes which she had made, and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother, in his bedroom, where he was on the bed. And when she had brought them unto him to eat, he took hold of her, and said to her, come lie with me, my sister. And she answered him, nay, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing ought to be done in Israel. Do not thou this folly. Well, at this point, she doesn't have anybody around to help her. But she's saying, don't do this. And in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 17, just to put this in here, I don't know if these kids, men and women, would have known this, but David would have. But in Leviticus it says, it's 20 verse 17, if a man has marital relations with his sister, whether the daughter of his father or of his mother, so that he sees her nakedness and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace. They must be cut off in the sight of the children of their people. He has exposed his sister's nakedness, he will bear his punishment for iniquity. So that included all the children of David at this point. And David would have known this. The rest of them should have known it also. So let's continue in 2 Samuel 13:13. And I, Tamar continues, whither shall I cause my shame to go? And as for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, speak to the king, for he shall not withhold me from thee. Howbeit he would not hearken to her voice, but being stronger than she, forced her and lay with her. And then, it's amazing to me, then in the next verse, verse 15, Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred wherewith he hated her was greater than the love wherewith he had loved her. That's how you know it's lust. And Amnon said to her, arise, be gone. And she said to him, there's no cause. This evil in sending me away is greater than the other that thou didst to me. But he would not hearken to her. Now I want to stop just a second. In comparison to what David had done, it's interesting to me that his reaping followed the sowing. So Amnon did not curb his lust. David had not curbed his either with Bathsheba. It was a sexual sin, so it was for David. Amnon was deceptive about it, so was David. Amnon went further on than this and became violent. Since she wouldn't just do what he asked, he forced her. He was violent, and David used violence also. And he said that she told Amnon, it's what you're doing now and sending me away is worse than what you did before. And David's sin in having Uriah killed was worse than the adultery that he had committed. It's interesting to me how it just follows. And I'm sure David didn't miss that either. So Amnon, verse 17, he called his servant that ministered unto him and said, put now this woman out from me and bolt the door after her. Can you imagine how Tamar must have felt at this point? And she had a garment of divers colors upon her, for with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins apparelled. Then his servant brought her out, bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head, and rent her garment of divers colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head, and went on crying. And Absalom her brother said to her, hath Amnon thy brother been with thee? But hold now thy peace, my sister, he's thy brother, regard not this thing. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. So she is just completely devastated. And she's not being, quiet about this. I think it pretty soon was a well-known thing. It happened, it was a public thing. She didn't hide anything. And for Absalom, when he said, hold thy peace, regard not this thing, he's not saying it's okay. He's just saying, just wait. Just wait.
I'll take care of this.
Yeah, I'll take care of this. And that's not the right attitude either. But, and another verse in Leviticus, sometimes in reading the Old Testament, especially the commands of God and the things that He wants us to do, I think it might be easy to think, oh, yeah, sure, we should do that, we should do this. But God wasn't writing down those rules for Himself or because He just thought it might be fun to have us. Yeah. God wants the very best for us. So it might behoove us to read some of those rules and see, because He hasn't changed. And life hasn't changed. It's the same way for us as it is for these.
You ladies might pray, because my lesson on Sunday, we're doing instruction. So we're in Proverbs a lot.
Mm.
And there's at least 2 full things of Proverbs that has to do about the unchaste woman and this poor simpleton that's walking right into her trap and all. And so we're going to talk about it, and I don't want shock and awe. I just want to put it in the context that God knows this. He knew it about them. He knows it about us. You're going to face it. What does God say to us about it?
Yes.
This story has never changed, you see. But I'm not a parent. I don't want to overstep bounds. But they need to hear this. They need to hear it correctly. So just that God's Spirit would do this for me, in me, through me. And now, of course, we have Xander, so it's mixed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay, we will pray. Leviticus 19:17. You must not hate your brother in your heart. You must surely reprove your fellow citizen, so that you do not incur sin on account of him. And now I hadn't seen this verse before that I remember. I thought it was interesting that it says, reprove your fellow citizen so that you do not incur sin on account of him. Makes perfect sense. Absalom began to hate Amnon from this minute on. And he incurred sin because of his hatred for Amnon. God is telling us, don't hate your brother, not because of what you might do to your brother, that too, but what it's going to do in your own heart. And even if we're from civilized country, we don't do those sort of things, and we don't go around murdering people. But if we have murder in our heart, if we have hatred in our heart, does God see it as the same thing?
no.
I think so. I think He does. So here we see Absalom hated Amnon. Now, if he had had any idea where that would lead, he would have done it God's way. And if we can't take the hatred out of our own hearts, but we sure have a God who can and who will. If we come to Him and ask Him with a pure heart, sincere heart, Lord, I can't do this. Will you do it for me? He will. It doesn't matter what that person has done to you. It's God's power that forgives. We don't have any power to forgive. But if Absalom had by all means gone to God, he would have saved his own life, because he ended up losing his life. And it started right here. In Leviticus 19:18, thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. It just makes it a little bit more serious to me when I think, if somebody has offended you or me, do I have a grudge in my heart, kind of against them, and maybe I'm aloof or
Or
little.
do you have the right to do that?
Yeah, because they offended me. So, stop. So anyway, God knows what He's talking about. It's our hearts that He's concerned with. But Absalom might have thought, well, nobody else is doing anything about it. And that brings me to the next thing. First of all, I'll read in Romans 12, and then we'll get to that thought. Romans 12:19. Do not avenge yourselves, dear friends, but give place to God's wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. Okay, someone hurts you, someone actually does you wrong. God's vengeance is a much better thing on that person than yours. You have no idea what that person has in their heart and what it's going to do to you to exact your own vengeance. God has it. Let him have it. And Absalom, by all means, should have done this. It's like you see Satan's trap and you watch Absalom and Amnon just walk right down and fall into that trap, and the end is destruction. Their lives are taken. It's no different today. It's like when I was reading this, it was like a soap opera. It is. And do we have soap operas today? Yes, we do. They may not be as open and obvious as these were in the Old Testament. We have them. And is our lives going to be ruined in the same way? Absolutely, it will. If I think of several dear people that I know that fell into sin, and oh my goodness, the next 10 years of their lives were horrendous. If they could have just known, if they would have just seen it. So, okay, now is the time. Don't worry about the past. Start doing right now. There's a reason to follow the Lord.
Was there anything in this as far as David's government or David's place if Absalom had gone to his father?
We're going to talk about that.
Oh, okay. But one of the interesting things in this Proverbs 7, which is one of those chapters I was telling you about this poor simpleton that's been entrapped. But it says, he went the way to her house in the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night. That's where these things happen, undercover,
Yes,
not
yes.
out in
Right.
the open. Even though it eventually came out, Lord, but it's all underhanded. It's all
in the dark.
in the
Darkness.
dark.
Yes. One other verse, Matthew 18:15. Moreover, and this is for us, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. Okay, what if Absalom had gone to Amnon and said, Amnon, you can't do this, and I don't know, maybe he could have said it in such a way just to so that there wouldn't have been the burning and festering hatred in his heart for Amnon. And it might have, maybe Amnon was, I'm sorry you did that. I don't know. It might have saved the whole situation had Absalom gone to him. Or, like Leanne was suggesting, Absalom had other things he could have done right now instead of just kept it in his heart and burned with hatred. He could have gone to the king. I think, that would have been, and then David and Absalom could have gone to Amnon. Something should have been done, and nothing was done at this point. One other verse, 1 John 3:15, whosoever hateth his brother is a murderer. That's how God looks at it. So I want to be real careful. Satan makes sure we have a reason to hate someone. He makes sure of it. But if we fall for that, then what is that hatred really in our heart? It's murder. And ye know that no murderer hath eternal life abiding in him. We can't hang on to our own hatred and whatever it is we want to hang on, and vengeance and bitterness and grudging, whatever. It may be different, just a little bit different bits of the same thing. It's going to reap. It's going to reap every time. And we can't afford to do that. Not if we want God's best. To me, God means more to me than whatever pleasure I might think I might get by exacting revenge on my own. And that's what should have been the way with Absalom and Amnon. Now, look at verse 21. But when King David heard of all these things, Amnon did it in secret, but Tamar was devastated, and in a small place like the palace, it would have gone. Everybody probably knew within the hour what had happened. When King David heard of all these things, he was very wroth and did absolutely nothing. And, I feel bad for David. He might not have known what to do, but you can be sure that his own sin played a part in the fact of him doing nothing. However, he should have by all means done something.
Bad enough for a king, but as a father?
Yes, as a father and a king, both as either one of those, but as
Yeah.
both, he definitely should have done. Because if he had brought judgment on Amnon, I don't know what he could have done to Amnon, but there should have been a judging of Amnon, a judging of this, even for Amnon's sake, so that he wouldn't have a guilty conscience, and just like David, David had to go a year or at least a year, because his sin was not out in the open. He knew how he felt. How is Amnon going to feel? The same way. It needs to be dealt with. And then also, Absalom, I think, had something been brought to pass, a judgment on Amnon, it would have helped Absalom. Because he would have seen that, okay. It would have made him feel better.
So what you're saying is that God's ways work.
Right. God's ways work. And to not do anything, it set events in motion where David lost both of his sons. And it didn't have to be that way.
And what happened to this? I don't know that we ever hear anything else about her, do we?
Tamar? I should look into it a little bit more. I just remember briefly seeing that I thought she had children, so I think she must have gotten married. So anyway. Verse 22, and Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon. So he didn't have anything to do with Amnon, because he had forced his sister Tamar. And I was thinking, when we ignored God's rules, it's kind of like you just said, those signs, proceed at your own risk.
Yes.
And there's risk, great risk, when we just decide we're going to do it ourselves. So, David's sins are bearing fruit now. As a father, he's watching his own son sin against God and the consequences. All right. In 2 Samuel 8:15, I just want to bring this to your memories. David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and justice unto all his people. But did David rule his own household as well as he ruled the country? No, because he was just and executed judgment on behalf of his people, and he wouldn't do that with his own family.
Nobody wants to mess up their own family.
Mess up is not it's going to be a much worse mess because he didn't.
What it says in the New Testament is concerning the church is how can a man
Be an elder or something if he can't rule his own household.
When he can't
Yes.
rule his own home. So
Right.
What was that, 2 Samuel?
2 Samuel 8:15. And remember, I do have a list of these.
Oh, okay.
Okay, in verse 23, 2 years later, that's a long time to have something be in your heart that's festering. Absalom's sheep shearers were in Baal Hazor near Ephraim. Absalom invited all the king's sons. Now remember, he's had 2 years to plan this. Then Absalom went to the king and said, my shearers have begun their work. Let the king and his servants go with me. Usually they had a big celebration when the shearing time came. Everyone would get together and they would shear the sheep and just have a feast and celebrate. My shearers have begun their work. Let the king and his servants go with me. But the king said to Absalom, no, my son, we shouldn't all go. We shouldn't burden you in that way. I don't know exactly what David had in mind here. Though Absalom pressed him, the king was not willing to go. Instead, David blessed him. Then Absalom said, "Well, if you won't go, then let my brother Amnon go with us." The king replied to him, "Why should he go with you?" But when Absalom pressed him, he sent Amnon and all the king's sons along with him. So again, maybe David just didn't want to believe that his sons would be conniving, but it should have been a big red flag right there that Absalom specifically asked that Amnon go. And because, and let me read this real quick, we'll read it later, but in verse 32, Jonadab, the same crafty guy that came up with the idea for Amnon in the first place, towards the end of the verse it says, "This is what Absalom has talked about from the day that Amnon humiliated his sister Tamar." So evidently Absalom talked about his plans for Amnon. All right, so you've got this small group of people living together at the palace, including the harem and all the kids and the king and servants, and it's like a little commune. Anyway, you can't hide things. And so Absalom evidently talked about what he wanted to do to Amnon and how he might do it. And David should have had one ear out for what was going on in his palace. He should have known what Absalom felt against Amnon. Evidently, Absalom didn't hide it very well. And so when I think David should have gone.
He felt like he was in a fog.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah. And maybe David had real pressing affairs of the state right here, but maybe he should have been a little bit more involved with his kids' lives. When, of course, Absalom is a man right now, but he's asking David to do something, I think, to be with him. Maybe it would have averted things. I don't know exactly what Absalom had in mind in inviting David. He might have known for sure that David wouldn't go, which is not a good thing either. Or he might have had in mind, "I'm going to show you, David. I'm going to show you, Dad, how you're supposed to judge people that do wrong things." He didn't have any good in mind, but when he specifically asked for Amnon to come, David should have seen that that was a problem. All right. So, Absalom instructed his servants, verse 28. He instructed his servants, "Look, when Amnon is drunk, and I say to you, strike Amnon down, kill him then and there. Don't fear. Is it not I who have given you these instructions? Be strong and courageous." So evidently it was just a common thing to get drunk. So they were celebrating, and that was part of it. That's another thing that goes against God's rules. So, lest we think that, oh man, that person's just being a prude when they're wanting to do all these things. I remember being called Miss Pure sometimes, and it didn't set real well. But you know what? Following God's ways is always better. It's always better. And even the most evil-hearted person is going to realize that at one point in their life. So I thought it was interesting. Absalom doesn't do it himself. Verse 29. So Absalom's servants did to Amnon exactly what Absalom had instructed. Then all the king's sons got up. Each one rode away on his mule and fled. So that was the end of the celebration right there. He had his servants kill Amnon, which they did. Remember how David killed Uriah? He didn't kill him himself. He had him killed. Verse 30, while they were still on their way, the following report reached David. Absalom has killed all his king's sons, and not one of them is left. I don't know how he got that report. That wasn't the truth, but can you imagine what David felt right then? Then the king stood up and tore his garments and lay down on the ground. All his servants were standing there with torn garments as well. Jonadab, now we see this crafty guy again, the son of David's brother Shimei, said, "My lord should not say they've killed all the young men who are the king's sons, for only Amnon is dead." Now I would have thought he might have felt bad too, because before we see he was a friend of Amnon's. This is what Absalom has talked about from the day that Amnon humiliated his sister Tamar.
He's playing both sides of the
Yes, he is.
thing here.
Now don't let my lord the king be concerned about the report that has come, saying all the king's sons are dead. It is only Amnon who is dead. Now, I'm sure that would ease David's mind, but he's not going to feel good about Amnon being dead either. That's his son. But Absalom fled, verse 37, and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. That was his mother's side of the family. So that's where he fled to. And David mourned for his son every day. And it's not real clear who he mourned for. I'm sure he mourned for both Absalom and Amnon, but at the beginning he would mourn for Amnon because he's dead. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. 3 years. And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. So 3 years had passed. He had been comforted, been okay. I don't know if that's the word either, okay, but anyway, he had grieved already concerning Amnon. Now he's grieving concerning Absalom. But we see that 3 years passed. David didn't do anything about Absalom either. Not a thing. And you know, even for the person who commits the crime, they need closure in order for them not to be, because we're going to see what happens to Absalom because of this. And I want to bring another verse in real quick. 1 Kings 1, 5, and 6. Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, "I will be king." Now, he was another one of David's sons, and this is later on. He prepared him chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. And his father, David, had not displeased him at any time, saying, "Why have you done this?" And he was a very goodly man. His mother bare him after Absalom. So, in other words, he was another son of David by the same mother as Absalom. But I underlined, his father had not displeased him at any time. Do you think maybe this was David's manner with the rest of the sons, children? Probably. So, you know, to all parents who have a hard time, we're pretty much beyond that here, but as a note to parents who don't want to displease their kids, go ahead and displease them.
That's always been my problem. Rick thought that I was too harsh, and I displeased him evenly. I always, but Rick doesn't. Rick is very gentle, very kind. And then when it comes to it, he can be harsh, but not for the most part. He's gentle and kind, whereas I'm always the other way.
Well, being gentle and kind should include bringing discipline. You can be gentle and kind in doing it, but you've got to bring discipline.
But even when they're older and they come to us for advice,
Sure.
we still have that same principle of
Yes.
displeasing them with the advice.
Yes, Alice is saying even when they're older and come to us, we need to not fear displeasing them, because it's either going to be God's way, which brings blessing, or our way, which brings death.
And it's still that way with us. Jeff is still not speaking to me because I was so harsh. Just not too long ago. And see, Rick's not that way. Rick's gentle and
Well,
sweet.
you can amend that, you know.
That's what Rick says.
It makes me think about Eli when God told him that you have, I don't know how he said it, you've pleased your sons above me,
Yes.
or put your sons before me, this kind of thing. It's the
Because he
same.
didn't want to cross his sons. Yes. So we see that was David's way of parenting. And I actually have the next chapter here, but I don't have any, there's not a whole lot of I just was going to read it to you.
Go ahead.
um,
I love to hear you.
So it looks like we probably will have to wait on this. But if you want to look ahead, read chapter 14 for next week, and you'll be a step ahead. Um, like I said at the beginning, these have been kind of hard chapters, but I can see that God's showing us, first of all, the results, the consequences of David's sin, and then He's showing us the children, what they could have done, the sons, how they could have been different. Their lives would have been saved literally. And that was what stood out to me in studying this. It's like 1 + 1 is 2. Don't ever fool yourself into thinking it's not. It is. And you can't change that. And we just need to obey God. We've got to. And we can't just feel bad or pamper or whatever reasons we have of not giving out God's advice to our children or friends. It's not worth it to follow our own ways. We've got to follow God's.
When you said it would have saved their lives literally, again in Proverbs it says, withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with a rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell.
Yes, and you know what? Sometimes I might hear that and almost want to laugh, but it's true. It is so true. And we all could probably tell stories of people we know, maybe in our families, where this is true. So we know better. So read chapter 14 for next time.
What scripture is that?
Hold on just a second. That's Proverbs 23, 13 and 14.